Okay, we continue with lesson book 3-1, and we're looking at graphing. So the last lesson we looked at plotting points and looking at patterns with the points, and noticing there were two types of patterns, those that kind of form a line and those that form a curve. We called that non-linear situation. So officially now what we're going to study is what we call different types of equations, 3 different types of equations we're going to look at in this course: linear equations, exponential equations, and quadratic equations. And so if you look carefully, each of them has like a different look. And so these first questions are about what do you recognize in the different types of equations. And it's important to know that when you make a graph, of a making a graph of an equation, it forms a pattern. And in this case, a linear equation forms a line. And so if you look carefully, some of the distinguishing markers are that they have x and y's, they're powers of 1. Exponential equations have the exponent as a variable. So if you look carefully, the exponent's a variable. And then you have quadratic equations where it's an x squared is involved. Each of those produce a different looking graph. And so the first question is, well, just some practice. Can you identify equations from the way they look? And so I've done that for you already here. If you look carefully at the ones that are highlighted, these are quadratic. This is a linear equation. This is exponential. And again, it has to do with where the exponent is for an exponential. Here, this is a power of 1, and this is a power of 2. And so looking at that, that's what determines the quadratic. And now if you look at the different types of graphs that are created with this, you'll see these equations here. You will see these here, and see the graphs, they're different forms. This one is a curve, this is a line. And then you have these that are what we call parabolas or quadratic equations. And so those are the things we're looking for, and these are called families of functions, families of equations. So these are linear family, exponential family, or exponential equations, and quadratic equations produce parabolas, and that's what we have. Like I said before, we're going to try, I want you to use Desmos to support your work, and so I want to show you how to do that. So just to show you briefly, we want to graph these equations here, and so how do you produce that there? Well, let's use technology first, so let me get you to Desmos. There's Desmos, and so that first equation, coming back to it, is y equals 3/2 x minus 4. Y equals 3/2 x minus 4. So you just type that in, y equals 3 divided by 2x minus 4. And if you notice here, you'll see you get the graph, and then you can, if you notice carefully, you'll see you have a plus and minus sign over here, so that you can change the size. You can play with that a little bit to see what happens there, and you can see the equation you get there. Okay, so I want to make sure you recognize that. The other equation that we were looking at was y equals, let's try y equals 4 to the x. Try plugging that in. And so y equals 4 raised to the power of x. And so you have a keyboard on the bottom there to also bring up the different things. So you want to get used to doing that. This is raised to the power button right there. And so you can see, look at that graph there, matches up to the graph we had here. And then if you want y equals x squared, looking at that one right there, we could go ahead and plug that in. So I would say y, and then you can say equals x to the power of 2, or raised to the power of 2. And then you can see it produces that there. You can also see like important points here. So when you get a chance, play around with Desmos. Like I said, you'll be allowed to use that. I'll have iPads for exam 3 once we get to unit 3, and then for the final in unit So we want to make sure you keep that in mind as we're thinking about exam 3 and exam 3 and the final exam. You can use Desmos. So that's what you would do. So try that here with this here. I'll also send a link to I'll find some tutorials on Desmos, but again, it's pretty easy to graph these equations. And first practice by checking to see if you can graph these.